Nurse Rachel Voss had spent 18 months at Fairview General being quietly dismissed by almost everyone who mattered in that building. Then, the ER doors locked from the inside during an active attack, and while everyone else waited for police to breach the building, Rachel started clearing rooms exactly the way she'd been trained years before medicine ever entered her life. Rachel started at Fairview General a year and a half earlier, 30 years old, unremarkable by design, moving through her shifts with a quiet efficiency that most of her coworkers mistook for a lack of ambition. She kept her answers brief. She kept her past unmentioned. She let people fill in the blanks however they wanted. Dr. Owen Castellano, the ER's senior attending, filled in those blanks with his own particular brand of condescension. "She's fine for basic patient care," he told the nursing supervisor during Rachel's 4th month, not lowering his voice enough. "But I wouldn't trust her with anything requiring real composure under pressure. There's nothing in her background that suggests she's built for genuine crisis." Nursing supervisor Patricia Nolan raised an eyebrow at that, but said nothing. Not yet. Castellano's assessment hardened quickly into department habit. Rachel got the stable patients, the routine assessments, the quiet overnight monitoring nobody worried about. Anything requiring composure under real pressure went to Castellano's preferred staff, regardless of who actually possessed it. "Voss, can you handle discharge paperwork tonight?" Castellano asked one evening, tone carrying the particular patience of someone who had long since considered alternatives. "Keep it simple. I think that's more your speed." The younger nurses chuckled, absorbing his opinion as settled fact. Rachel nodded once and walked toward the discharge desk without comment. What none of them noticed was the way her eyes swept every room for exits and blind spots the instant she entered, the way her hands moved with an economy of motion that came from having done far harder things under far worse conditions, the way she carried herself like someone who had once been responsible for far more than a hospital floor. She had a small, precise scar along her hairline, easily hidden, that she never explained. When anyone asked, she said, "Old accident," and changed the subject. And most people let her because there was no reason yet to press further. By her 18th month, the department's assumptions about her were unshakable. New hires were quietly warned not to expect much from the quiet one on nights. Castellano routed every high-pressure situation away from her by habit now, without consciously deciding. "Voss, just keep the routine patients stable tonight," he said one Thursday, with the practiced patience of someone speaking to a subordinate several tiers beneath him. "Leave anything demanding to me." "Understood." And Rachel returned to her charts before her expression could give anything away. Nobody in that hospital knew that the woman being handed discharge paperwork had once served as a military police officer attached to a specialized close-quarters response unit, trained extensively in room-clearing tactics and crisis negotiation before an injury ended her active service and redirected her, quietly and deliberately, toward medicine. Nobody knew her calm wasn't the absence of capability. It was the specific, hard-earned stillness of someone who had already survived situations that made hospital politics look almost trivial by comparison. They would find out. Just not yet. The attack began at 9:47 on a Tuesday night, without warning and without the kind of buildup that gives people time to prepare. A man, later identified as Derek Holloway, recently released on bail after a domestic violence charge, forced his way into the ER through the ambulance bay, armed and searching for his estranged wife, who had been brought in earlier that evening for injuries he himself had caused. The first shot, fired into the ceiling to clear his path, sent the entire waiting room into chaos. Patients dropped to the floor, staff scattered toward the back hallways. Then the ER doors locked automatically, per hospital protocol during an active threat, sealing the entire unit from the outside and trapping everyone inside with the man who had caused it. "He's got the west corridor." Patricia's voice came in a tight whisper over the internal radio, hiding with 2 junior nurses near the nurses' station. "Security's locked out. Police are 4 minutes out at best." Castellano, along with most of the staff on shift, had retreated to the same back offices, barricaded and waiting, phones pressed to ears, voices low with barely restrained panic. Rachel had been in the medication room when the first shot rang out, and instead of moving toward the nearest hiding place, she moved toward the sound. Something in her had shifted the instant that gunshot echoed through the corridor, the quiet, deferential posture dropping away entirely, replaced by something sharper, faster, absolutely certain. Her breathing slowed instead of quickened. Her hands stopped their nervous habits and became perfectly, deliberately still. She had cleared rooms like this before, just never with a scalpel as her only tool. Moving low along the corridor wall, she reached the first patient room, an elderly man alone, frozen under his bed, eyes wide with terror. "I need you to stay exactly where you are and stay silent," she whispered, checking the room's second exit, confirming it clear before moving on. "Help is coming. You're doing everything right." She moved to the next room the same way, methodical, checking angles before entering, confirming each space clear before moving to the next, the same disciplined sequence she'd learned years earlier in an entirely different context, applied now to a hospital corridor instead of a compound she could no longer discuss in detail with anyone. Holloway's voice carried from somewhere near the central nurses' station, shouting his wife's name, his desperation curdling into something more volatile with every room that came up empty. Rachel reached the supply closet where Patricia and the junior nurses were hiding, tapping a specific, deliberate pattern on the door rather than knocking normally. "It's Voss. Stay silent. Stay down. I'm going to draw him away from this hallway." "Are you insane?" Patricia whispered back, voice shaking. "You need to hide, not walk toward him." "Someone needs to keep him moving away from the patients who can't move themselves. That's what I'm doing. Stay quiet." She continued down the corridor, and it was in the fourth room she checked, a young woman, badly bruised, clearly Holloway's estranged wife, hidden in the bathroom with the door locked, that Rachel found the actual center of the crisis. "He's looking for you," Rachel whispered through the bathroom door, voice calm and low. "I need you to stay exactly where you are, no matter what you hear. Can you do that?" A trembling voice answered, "He'll kill me if he finds me." "He won't find you. I'm not going to let that happen." She checked the corridor again, confirming her position, and then did something that made no sense to anyone watching from a hiding place nearby. She stepped directly into the open corridor where Holloway would see her. "Derek? My name is Rachel. I work here. I need to talk to you." Holloway spun toward her, weapon raised, eyes wild. "Where is she? Where's my wife?" "I don't know where every patient in this building is," Rachel said, which was technically not entirely a lie, since she genuinely didn't know where every patient was, only the one currently hidden 30 feet behind her. "But I know you don't actually want to hurt anyone here. You want to talk to her. That's different from what's happening right now." "Don't tell me what I want," Holloway snapped, weapon trembling in an unsteady grip. "I'm not telling you what you want," Rachel said, taking one slow, deliberate step forward, hands raised and open. "I'm telling you what's still possible if you put that down in the next few seconds. Right now, you're a man who's scared and angry. In another minute, if that gun goes off again, you're something you can't take back." "She had me arrested," Holloway said, voice cracking between rage and something closer to grief. "I understand you're in pain," Rachel said, and something in her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there in 18 months of quiet paperwork and dismissed potential. "But hurting her or anyone else in this building doesn't undo any of that. It just adds a new kind of pain that never goes away, for you and for everyone connected to you." His hand shook, the gun lowered an inch, then another. Somewhere behind a supply closet door, Patricia had cracked it just enough to watch, frozen, unable to look away from the woman she'd spent 18 months dismissing as unsuited for real pressure. "I just wanted to talk to her," Holloway said, voice breaking. "Then let's talk about how that happens safely," Rachel said gently. "But the weapon comes down first, not for me, for any version of your life that still exists after tonight." The gun clattered to the floor. Rachel crossed the remaining distance in measured steps, kicking the weapon further away with practiced economy before it could be reached, before placing a steady hand on Holloway as his knees buckled beneath the weight of his own collapse. The ER doors, controlled remotely once the immediate threat was neutralized, unlocked moments later as police finally breached the building, weapons raised, shouting commands. "He's not a threat anymore," Rachel called out, hands still visible, voice steady. "Weapons secured. Everyone in this hallway is safe." They lowered their weapons at the sight of Holloway on his knees, disarmed and sobbing, and moved in to take him into custody without further incident. 20 minutes later, once Holloway had been removed from the building and his estranged wife had been safely reunited with the responding officers who would ensure her protection, Fairview General's staff slowly emerged from closets and back offices into a corridor that Rachel had single-handedly kept from becoming a massacre. Patricia stood frozen near the nurse's station, staring at her. "How?" she said slowly. "How did you do that? You walked toward him. Everyone else was hiding, and you walked toward him." Before Rachel could answer, one of the responding officers, a sergeant who had led the breach team, approached her, studying her with an expression of dawning recognition. "Voss, you're MP Voss. Fort Bragg. I trained under the same close quarters program you helped instruct before your injury. I heard you'd left the service. Didn't expect to find you clearing rooms in a hospital corridor." The room went silent. "Your former military police," Castellano said, reappearing from wherever he'd been hiding, face pale. "Special response training?" "I was," Rachel said simply. "A long time ago in a life I don't usually discuss." "You cleared that entire wing," the sergeant said, still processing. "Room by room, under fire, without a weapon. That's not something civilians do. That's not something most trained officers do without hesitation." "I did what needed doing," Rachel said quietly. "The tools were just different than what I trained with originally." Castellano stared at her, something shifting visibly behind his eyes. "You should have told us who you were." "Would it have mattered?" Rachel asked, echoing a question she'd asked herself countless times over 18 months of quiet dismissal. "Or would you have just found a different reason to assume I wasn't built for real pressure?" Nobody answered, because everybody in that hallway already knew the truth. The hospital board called it a review of unauthorized crisis intervention and evacuation procedure deviation. Rachel called it what it actually was, an inquiry into whether she'd be punished for saving lives during an active threat without waiting for permission from people who had spent 18 months deciding she wasn't capable of handling exactly that kind of pressure. She sat across from the hospital's chief administrator 3 days later, alongside a hospital attorney glancing repeatedly at his watch, and a police captain who had personally requested to be present. "You engaged an armed individual without authorization, deviating significantly from standard lockdown procedure," the administrator said, reading from a file. "Regardless of outcome, that represents a serious liability question. The outcome is every patient and staff member in that building walked out alive," Rachel said evenly. "That's not the metric we're discussing, Nurse Voss." "With respect," a voice said from the doorway, "I think it's exactly the metric." Castellano stood there, still in scrubs, uninvited but present anyway. "I was hiding in a back office while she cleared an entire wing alone. I've reviewed the incident report and the security footage repeatedly since. There is no version of that night where standard procedure would have produced a better outcome than what she did." The administrator's eyebrow lifted. "That's a significant statement, Doctor." "It's an honest one. I spent 18 months deciding a woman wasn't built for real crisis based on nothing but my own assumptions. Tonight, she's the reason there wasn't a mass casualty event in this building." Patricia, asked to attend as witness, spoke next. "I want that on record too. We built an entire departmental culture around dismissing her before we ever watched her actually work under real pressure. That's on all of us." The attorney cleared his throat. "This doesn't resolve the liability question of unauthorized engagement with an armed threat." "Then reframe the question," the police captain said flatly. "I've reviewed her military service record extensively over the past 3 days. What she did on that corridor wasn't a deviation from protocol. It was textbook close-quarters crisis response, executed flawlessly, without a weapon, using nothing but training and composure most trained officers spend years failing to fully internalize." She didn't break your rules that night. She followed better ones most people in this building will never have reason to learn." The room went quiet. The administrator closed the file slowly, her tone shifting from procedural to something closer to respect. "I'll take this under full review," she said. "Off the record, thank you for what you did." "Take your time," Rachel said calmly. "I'm not going anywhere." The review might have ended there quietly if not for what happened 1 week later. Holloway, awaiting trial, had confided to a fellow detainee about a business partner who he believed had helped hide assets during his ongoing divorce proceedings, a man who had grown increasingly paranoid that Holloway's arrest and the resulting scrutiny would expose financial crimes far more serious than domestic violence. That partner, watching his own carefully built life begin to unravel, arrived at Fairview General on a Friday night, armed and convinced that silencing anyone connected to the case, including Holloway's estranged wife still recovering under hospital care, was his only remaining option. Security caught it on camera first. A man moving toward the hospital's rear entrance with clear, purposeful intent, weapon visible beneath his jacket. "Lock down." The security chief's voice cracked over the radio. "All non-essential personnel to shelter positions immediately." Rachel, finishing rounds nearby, heard the alert and moved toward it instead of away, her body settling instantly into the same disciplined stillness that had carried her through the corridor 1 week earlier. "You need to get clear, Voss," a tech said, already pulling patients toward a supply closet. "Not again, please." "I know exactly what I'm doing this time," Rachel said, already moving toward the rear corridor. "That's the difference. Get everyone else clear." The man breached the rear doors moments later, weapon raised, demanding to know Holloway's wife's room number, voice carrying the particular desperation of someone who had already decided how far he was willing to go. Rachel stepped into view before security could fully engage, hands raised, voice dropping into the same low, absolute calm that had ended a crisis 1 week earlier. "She's already given her full statement to police. Whatever you're trying to prevent by finding her, it's already too late to prevent it. Killing her now only adds charges to whatever's already coming for you." "You don't know anything about what's coming for me," the man snapped, weapon trembling in an unsteady grip. "I know exactly what panic does to people who think violence is still an option," Rachel said, taking one slow, deliberate step forward. "I've spent years watching that exact calculation fail every single time for the people who tried it. Put the weapon down. Not for me, for whatever version of your life still exists after tonight, because right now you still have one to walk back to." The weight of her stillness, so completely at odds with his rising desperation, seemed to physically slow the moment down. "It's already over," Rachel added quietly. "The only thing left to decide is how much worse you make it in the next 10 seconds. The weapon lowered, then dropped entirely. Security moved in fast but controlled, following Rachel's steady hand signal not to escalate, and the man was taken into custody without a single shot fired, without a single further injury to anyone in that corridor. The hospital board, informed within the hour, arrived the next morning to a version of Fairview General that had changed dramatically in the span of 8 days. The chief administrator stood before the full board and read from a report entirely reframed from where it had started a week earlier. Nurse Rachel Voss, former military police officer, specialized close quarters crisis response instructor, honorably discharged following injury sustained in active service. In the past 8 days alone, she has single-handedly ended one active shooter situation without injury and de-escalated a second armed confrontation targeting a vulnerable patient, preventing what could easily have been 2 separate mass casualty events. She looked up. This board owes Nurse Voss a formal apology for 18 months of documented dismissiveness toward a highly trained professional, and announces immediate changes to how this hospital evaluates staff competency and crisis preparedness, effective immediately. Castellano requested a private meeting with Rachel that same week, not to defend himself, but simply to apologize plainly. "I decided who you were within months of meeting you, based on nothing real," he said. That's entirely on me. I'd like to learn how to actually evaluate people properly, if you'll teach me." "I will," Rachel said. "But it starts with watching first, judging never." Patricia requested to be permanently paired with Rachel's shifts, calling it quietly the most honest education she'd had in years of nursing. The police sergeant who had recognized her arranged for Fairview General to receive proper active shooter response training, insisting Rachel help design and lead the program herself. And Rachel Voss, once dismissed as unsuited for real pressure, was offered the hospital's new Director of Emergency Preparedness position, a role she accepted only once it came without ceremony, exactly the way she preferred to be recognized. 2 months later, Fairview General looked much the same on the surface, but something underneath had shifted permanently. New hires were trained differently now. Nobody assumed a quiet file meant an empty one. Nobody dismissed a colleague's composure under pressure as evidence of nothing rather than evidence of everything. Castellano ran his new evaluation protocols with a humility that had cost him nearly everything to learn. Patricia trained incoming staff with a phrase she now repeated constantly: "Composure isn't the absence of capability, it's usually proof of it." And Rachel Voss still moved through that hospital quietly, still didn't raise her voice, still didn't need to. Because everyone in that building finally understood what it had taken a locked door and an armed stranger twice to teach them. The steadiest person in the room is rarely the loudest one before the crisis begins. Training doesn't announce itself in ordinary moments. It reveals itself only when everything else falls apart. Doors can lock people in, but they can't lock away the training someone already carries with them. And the ones dismissed as least equipped for crisis are sometimes the only ones who already know exactly how to walk through it. The end. This story is fictional and created for entertainment purposes only.